The afternoon sun streamed through the bus windows as Tyrell settled into one of the last empty seats. At just 17, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his backpack stuffed with notes for the scholarship interview that could change everything for him. His mom had ironed his blue button-up shirt twice that morning, her eyes shining with pride as she straightened his collar. 20 minutes to review, Tyrell muttered, pulling out his folder. Growing up on the south side of the city meant opportunities like this didn't come easy. His teachers had recommended him for the engineering scholarship, impressed by how he'd built a working robot from scraps found at the local junkyard. The bus lurched forward, packed with the usual afternoon crowd, workers heading home, students with headphones, elderly folks clutching shopping bags. Tyrell didn't notice the man watching him from the front until he was standing over him, the smell of cigarettes clinging to his jacket. "Hey, kid, my friends need to sit together," the man said, gesturing to two people behind him. "Find another spot." Tyrell looked around at the crowded bus. Every seat was taken, people standing in the aisles, holding onto handrails. "I'm sorry, sir, but there aren't any other seats," he replied politely, the way his grandmother had taught him. "And I really need to study for my interview." The man's face darkened. "You think you're special? I've been working 12 hours at the factory while you've been sitting in school all day." People nearby started to notice the exchange, some turning away uncomfortably, others watching with concern. A woman across the aisle caught Tyrell's eye and gave him a small nod of support. "I don't want any trouble," Tyrell said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I have a right to this seat just like anyone else." "You people always think you deserve special treatment," the man sneered, his voice getting louder. The bus grew, quieter as more passengers tuned into what was happening. Tyrell felt his heart hammering but remembered what his coach always said. Sometimes standing your ground was about staying calm, not raising your voice. "Sir, I'm just trying to get to my interview." The man's friend pulled at his arm. "Come on, it's not worth it." But something had switched in the man's eyes. "Nobody tells me no," he growled, and before anyone could react, his open palm connected with Tyrell's cheek with a crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent bus. Tyrell's head snapped to the side, his papers scattering across the floor. The sting spread across his face as he blinked back tears of shock and anger. He'd never been hit by a stranger before, never been humiliated like this in public. Phone cameras emerged from pockets. As passengers reacted, an older gentleman stood up from his seat. "That's assault. Driver, stop the bus right now." The driver called over his shoulder. "Police have been notified. Next stop is in 30 seconds. The man who had slapped Tyrell seemed suddenly aware of the cameras pointed at him, of the murmurs of disgust from other passengers. His friends backed away, pretending not to know him. "He was disrespectful," the man said to no one in particular, but the excuse fell flat in the tense air of the bus. Tyrell's hands trembled as he gathered his scattered papers, a red mark blooming on his cheek. A kind-faced woman helped him collect the pages that had slid under the seats. "You okay, honey?" she whispered. Tyrell could only nod, embarrassment and anger making it hard to speak. The bus pulled over to its scheduled stop with a hiss of brakes. The doors opened with a mechanical sigh. Several passengers moved to block the man from leaving, creating a wall of bodies and stern faces. "Let the police handle this," someone said firmly. And then, as if the universe had decided to take a strange turn, a figure stepped onto the bus that made everyone do a double take. Tall, with a presence that commanded attention without effort. Even dressed in simple jeans and a black jacket, there was no mistaking who it was. Chuck Norris had just walked on board. The famous martial artist and actor paused at the top of the steps, taking in the scene before him, the red-faced man being blocked by passengers, the scattered papers, and Tyrell holding his cheek, trying hard not to let the tears in his eyes fall. The bus fell completely silent. Even the man who had done the slapping seemed to shrink in on himself, recognition dawning in his eyes. Nobody knew it yet, but this unexpected encounter was about to change Tyrell's life in ways he could never have imagined. What happened next would not only heal the sting of that slap, but open doors that Tyrell didn't even know existed. And it all began with Chuck Norris simply saying, "Looks like I picked the right bus today." The entire bus fell silent as Chuck Norris stepped aboard. The famous martial artist and actor surveyed the scene with calm, experienced eyes. He noticed the red mark on Tyrell's cheek, the scattered papers on the floor, and the group of passengers, blocking the angry man from leaving. "Looks like I picked the right bus today," Chuck said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of authority. The angry man's face drained of color. His friends, who'd been pretending not to know him, now inched even further away. One whispered, "Dude, that's Chuck Norris." Chuck moved through the crowded bus with surprising grace for a man in his 80s. Age hadn't diminished his presence. If anything, the silver in his hair only added to the respect he commanded. He knelt down, helping Tyrell pick up the last of his papers. "You okay, son?" he asked. Tyrell nodded, still processing what was happening. Just minutes ago, he'd been publicly humiliated, and now a legend was helping him gather his interview notes. "I'm fine, sir," Tyrell managed, his voice slightly shaky. "Thank you." Chuck turned to the man who'd slapped Tyrell, fixing him with a steady gaze. The man who had been so bold moments earlier now couldn't meet his eyes. "What happened here?" Chuck asked, though from the expressions of the other passengers he already had a good idea. An older woman spoke up from her seat. "This young man was just sitting here, minding his own business, preparing for an interview. That man demanded his seat for no good reason, and when the boy politely refused, he hit him." "I didn't mean to," the man started, but Chuck held up his hand. "In my experience," Chuck said, "hands are only raised in two situations: to help someone up or in self-defense." His words weren't loud, but they carried through the bus like a physical presence. Never to strike someone weaker or younger. That's not strength, that's cowardice. The bus driver called over his shoulder, "Police are 2 minutes out." Chuck nodded and turned back to Tyrell. "What's this interview for?" "Engineering scholarship," Tyrell replied, gaining confidence. "At Central State. I built a solar-powered water filtration system for my community project." Chuck's eyebrows raised, impressed. "That's something. My foundation actually supports STEM education for young people." "How long until your interview?" Tyrell checked his watch and his eyes widened. 45 minutes, but with this delay?" "Don't worry," Chuck said. "We'll make sure you get there." Blue lights flashed outside as a police car pulled alongside. The bus. 2 officers boarded, and the driver pointed them toward the back. One of the passengers held up her phone. "I got the whole thing on video." Other passengers nodded. "We all saw what happened." The man who'd slapped Tyrell tried to make himself smaller, suddenly aware of how serious the situation had become. "It was just a misunderstanding," he mumbled. "Assaulting a minor isn't a misunderstanding," one of the officers said firmly. "Sir, you'll need to come with us." As the police escorted the man off the bus, his friends suddenly found their voices. "We don't even know him that well," one said. Quickly. "We just met him at the factory." Chuck shook his head slightly and turned back to Tyrell. "Sometimes life throws unexpected challenges at us. What matters is how we respond." The bus began moving again. Passengers kept stealing glances at Chuck Norris, some taking discreet photos with their phones, others whispering excitedly to each other. Chuck seemed unbothered by the attention. He sat next to Tyrell, who was straightening his papers. "Tell me about this filtration system you built." Tyrell's face lit up as he explained his project, how he'd used recycled materials and basic science principles to create something that could help neighborhoods with contaminated water supplies. His initial nervousness around the celebrity faded as he talked about his passion. "My grandpa taught me how to fix things," Tyrell explained. "Said understanding how things work is the first step to making them better." Chuck nodded. "Smart man. Your grandfather." The bus approached another stop. Chuck checked his watch. "This is where we get off. I know a shortcut to Central State. We'll get you there with time to spare." Tyrell hesitated. "Why are you helping?" "Me, Mr. Norris." Chuck smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I've spent my life standing up for what's right. Some days that means fancy kicks in movies. Today it means making sure a bright young man gets to his scholarship interview on time." As they stepped off the bus together, Several passengers applauded. An older gentleman tipped his hat. "Class act, Mr. Norris. Class act." Outside on the sidewalk, Tyrell took a deep breath of fresh air. His cheek still stung from the slap, but somehow that seemed less important now. The anxiety about his interview was returning, though. What if they notice my face? He worried aloud. What if I'm too shaken up to answer their questions properly? Chuck placed a steady hand on Tyrell's shoulder. When I was starting out in martial arts competitions, I was nervous before every match. Know what my teacher told me? Tyrell shook his head. He said, "Breathe like you've already won. Your mind believes what you tell it, so tell it you're ready." As they walked toward Central State, Tyrell felt a new confidence growing within him. The day had taken an unexpected turn, from humiliation to walking alongside a legend who believed in him. What he didn't know yet was that this chance encounter would lead to opportunities he couldn't even imagine. And it all began because he'd stood his ground, however quietly, for what was right. The walk to Central State University took about 15 minutes. As Tyrell and Chuck made their way through the busy streets, people did double takes. Some pointed, others whispered, and a few brave souls asked for quick selfies, which Chuck politely obliged. "Does this happen everywhere you go?" Tyrell asked, amazed at how Chuck handled the attention with such grace. Chuck chuckled, "Pretty much. But today we've got a mission more important than photos." He checked his watch. 25 minutes until your interview. Perfect timing. They reached the campus gates, an impressive brick entrance with the university shield mounted above. Tyrell took a deep breath, suddenly feeling the weight of what was about to happen. His stomach tightened with nerves. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted quietly. "My face still hurts, and all I can think about is what happened on that bus." Chuck stopped walking and turned to face him. "Let me tell you something about pain. In my dojo back in the day, we had a saying, 'Pain is just weakness leaving the body.' But that's only half true." Tyrell looked up, curious. "The other half," Chuck continued, "is understanding that pain can either become your excuse or your story. Which one will you choose today?" The words sank in as they continued walking across the manicured campus lawn. Students rushed between buildings, some sprawled on the grass studying, others gathered in animated conversation. Normal college life that Tyrell hoped would soon be his reality. "My mom works 2 jobs, Tyrell said after a moment of silence. "She never complained, not once, even when the heating broke last winter, and she had to work overtime to pay for repairs. If she can handle that, I can handle a scholarship interview with a sore cheek." Chuck nodded approvingly. "Sounds like she raised a fighter." They reached the engineering building, an impressive glass and steel structure that seemed to reach for the sky. Inside, students in lab coats hurried past carrying projects and equipment. The walls were lined with photos of past achievements: robots, energy solutions, infrastructure designs that had changed communities. At the reception desk, a friendly-faced woman looked up. Her eyes widened when she saw Chuck Norris standing before her. Can I help you?" she stammered. "This young man has a scholarship interview," Chuck said plainly. "We had a situation on the way here. He was assaulted on a public bus for refusing to give up his seat." The receptionist's expression shifted to concern as she looked at Tyrell's still reddened cheek. "Oh my goodness. Are you all right? Should we call someone?" "The police have already handled it," Chuck assured her. "But I wanted to make sure he got here safely. This interview is important." She nodded, picking up her phone. "Let me just inform the committee." She spoke quietly into the receiver, occasionally glancing up at them with a look of disbelief. Tyrell used the moment to straighten his shirt and check his reflection in the glass door. The mark on his face was fading but still visible. He wondered what the interviewers would think. "Remember," Chuck said, sensing his worry, "true strength isn't in how hard you can hit. It's in how much you can take and still move forward." The receptionist hung up. "They're ready for you now. Professor Wilson. We'll meet you outside room 305. She hesitated, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. "Mr. Norris, I hate to ask, but my son would never believe me." Chuck smiled, taking the paper. "What's his name?" Kevin. He's 12 and wants to start karate lessons. As Chuck signed the autograph, adding a personal note of encouragement for Kevin, the elevator doors opened. A distinguished woman with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes stepped out, looking around until she spotted them. "You must be our scholarship candidate," she said, walking over with an extended hand. "I'm Professor Wilson, head of the engineering department." She then noticed his companion, and her professional demeanor briefly faltered. "And you're Chuck Norris." "Just making sure this young man got here safely," Chuck replied. "He had some trouble on the bus." Professor Wilson looked at Tyrell's face more closely. "I can see that. Are you all right to continue with the interview today? We could reschedule." Tyrell stood a little straighter. "No, ma'am, I'm ready now." She nodded, clearly impressed by his resilience. "Then let's not waste any more time. The committee is waiting." Tyrell turned to Chuck, suddenly realizing this might be goodbye. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Norris. I don't know how to repay you." Chuck shook his hand firmly. "Earn that scholarship. That's how you repay me." As Professor Wilson led Tyrell toward the elevator, Chuck called after them. "Actually, if it's all right with you, Professor, I'd like to sit in on this interview. I have a feeling this young man has quite a story to tell." Professor Wilson looked surprised, but pleased. "We'd be honored, Mr. Norris." In the elevator, Tyrell felt a strange calm settle over him. Hours ago, he'd been just another kid with big dreams and long odds. Now he was walking into the most important interview of his life with Chuck Norris at his side. The elevator doors opened on the third floor, revealing a hallway lined with awards and scientific posters. At the end was room 305, where 5 professors sat around a large table, surrounded by prototypes and blueprints from previous scholarship finalists. When they walked in, Tyrell, Professor Wilson, and Chuck Norris, the room fell silent. The committee members exchanged confused glances, clearly wondering why a martial arts legend was attending their scholarship interview. Professor Wilson cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, ladies, before we begin, there's been an unusual development today. Our candidate was assaulted on his way here for refusing to give up his seat on the bus. Mr. Norris happened to be there and helped ensure justice was served. He's asked to observe our proceedings." One elderly professor with thick glasses nodded slowly. "Well, this is certainly a first for our committee. But if Mr. Norris believes in this young man, I'm even more interested in hearing what he has to say." Tyrell took a deep breath and placed his project folder on the table. The pain in his cheek was now just a dull reminder of what he'd overcome to get here. He looked at the expectant faces of the committee, then at Chuck, who gave him an encouraging nod. And then, with a steadiness that surprised even himself, Tyrell began to speak about his engineering vision to make clean water accessible in disadvantaged communities. As he talked, the incident on the bus faded into the background, becoming just another obstacle he had overcome on his journey forward. For nearly an hour, Tyrell presented his water filtration project to the scholarship committee. He explained how he'd used recycled materials to create a system that could clean contaminated water at a fraction of the cost of commercial filters. His hands moved with confidence as he showed diagrams and water quality test results. "The most important part," Tyrell said, pointing to his final slide, "is that anyone can build this with basic tools and materials that cost less than $30. Professor Wilson leaned forward. "And you tested this in your own neighborhood?" Tyrell nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Our tap water sometimes comes out brown after heavy rains. My system cleared it up completely." The elderly professor with thick glasses who had spoken earlier removed them to rub his eyes. "Young man, I've reviewed hundreds of scholarship applications, but rarely have I seen someone so clearly identify a problem and create such a practical solution." Chuck Norris sat quietly in the corner, arms folded across his chest, a small smile of approval on his face. "Well," said Professor Wilson, "I think we've seen enough. We'll need a few minutes to discuss." She gestured toward the door. "If you wouldn't mind waiting outside?" Tyrell gathered his materials with steady hands. The nervousness that had plagued him earlier was gone, replaced by quiet pride in his work. Chuck followed him into the hallway, closing the door behind them. "You knocked it out of the park," Chuck said. The way you handled their questions like you'd been doing this your whole life. Tyrell let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Do you really think so? I was worried I talked too much about the cost savings and not enough about the technical aspects. Trust me, Chuck said. I've sat through enough board meetings for my foundation to know when someone has impressed a room. You had them at recycled materials. They found a bench near a large window overlooking the campus. Students hurried below, unaware of the life-changing moment happening 3 stories above them. Tyrell watched them, allowing himself to imagine being one of them soon. Can I ask you something, Mr. Norris? Tyrell said after a moment. Sure. Why did you stay? You could have just helped me get here and gone on with your day. Chuck looked thoughtful. When I was about your age, I was stationed in South Korea with the Air Force. Felt like a fish out of water. Then I discovered martial arts, and my instructor saw something in me I didn't see in myself. He paused. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you at the right moment. Tyrell nodded slowly. My science teacher was like that. When I told him I wanted to build this filtration system, everyone else laughed. He gave me lab access during lunch breaks. Remember his name, Chuck advised. The people who believe in us when no one else does, they're the ones who shape our paths. The door to room 305 opened, and Professor Wilson emerged with a smile. We're ready for you. Back inside, the committee members had rearranged themselves. They sat in a semicircle. Their notepads closed, a good sign. Tyrell, Professor Wilson began. Your project demonstrates exactly what we look for in our scholarship recipients. Innovation, practical application, and a desire to improve your community. The elderly professor nodded. Indeed. Your design could be implemented in rural areas worldwide, not just urban neighborhoods. Tyrell stood a little straighter, hardly daring to hope. We'd like to offer you the full scholarship, Professor Wilson continued. It covers tuition, housing, meals, and includes a monthly stipend for personal expenses. Tyrell's legs felt weak. The full scholarship? He repeated, certain he'd misheard. Yes, she confirmed. Additionally, we'd like to provide funding to develop your filtration system further. With proper backing, we believe it could help countless communities. Chuck's hand came to rest on Tyrell's shoulder, steadying him. I don't know what to say, Tyrell managed, his voice thick with emotion. Say yes, the elderly professor suggested with a warm smile. Yes, Tyrell said immediately. Yes, thank you. I won't let you down. As they left the building 30 minutes later, after signing preliminary paperwork and discussing next steps, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Tyrell stopped on the front steps of the engineering building, looking out at what would soon be his campus. I need to call my mom, he said, pulling out his phone with trembling hands. She won't believe this. Chuck smiled. Put it on speaker. I want to hear her reaction. Tyrell dialed, and after 3 rings, his mother answered. Baby, how did it go? Mom, Tyrell began, his voice cracking slightly. I got it. The full scholarship. They're even going to fund my project. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of muffled sobbing. I knew you could do it, she said through tears. I'm so proud of you, baby. Mom, there's someone here who helped me get to the interview when I was having trouble. Tyrell glanced at Chuck. You're not going to believe this, but it's Chuck. Norris, his mother's laughter came through the speaker. Baby, don't play with me, I'm emotional enough already. Chuck leaned toward the phone. Ma'am, this is Chuck Norris. Your son impressed me today, not just with his brilliant mind, but with his character. You've raised an exceptional young man. The stunned silence on the other end of the line was followed by a whispered, oh my goodness, it's really you. After the call ended with promises to explain everything when Tyrell got home, they walked toward the campus exit. The afternoon sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the lawn. What happens now? Tyrell asked. Chuck considered the question. Tomorrow you start preparing for your future. As for me, I'd like to talk to you about an idea I have for your filtration system. My foundation works with communities around the world that could use something like this. You mean like a partnership? Tyrell asked, hardly believing what he was hearing. Exactly like a partnership, Chuck confirmed. What started as a terrible moment on that bus could turn into something that helps thousands of people. As they reached the street, a sleek black car pulled up. The driver nodded respectfully to Chuck. My ride, Chuck explained. Can we drop you somewhere? Tyrell looked at the luxury car, then at the man beside him. Hours ago, he'd been just another kid from the South Side with big dreams. Now he was a scholarship recipient with a potential partnership with Chuck Norris's foundation. Actually, Tyrell said, would you mind taking me back to that bus stop? I want to see it again. Chuck raised an eyebrow. The bus stop? Why? Tyrell smiled. Because that's where everything changed. I want to remember it exactly as it was. As they drove through the city streets, Tyrell realized that sometimes life's worst moments can open doors to its greatest opportunities. And sometimes heroes show up when you least expect them, not with fancy kicks or dramatic rescues, but with a steady hand and the simple belief that you matter. 6 months passed since that life-changing day on the bus. The leaves had turned golden and fallen, and now the first hints of spring touched the university campus, where Tyrell had completed his first semester with honors. The small workshop behind the engineering building had become Tyrell's second home. Here, surrounded by tools and parts, he continued refining his water filtration system. What had started as a homemade solution for his neighborhood had evolved into a compact unit that could serve an entire community. Tyrell stepped back from his workbench, wiping sweat from his forehead. The prototype before him was smaller than his original design but could filter twice as much water. The university's resources had allowed him to use better materials while keeping costs reasonable. How's it coming along? A voice called from the doorway. Tyrell turned to see Chuck standing there, dressed simply in jeans and a dark jacket. Despite his busy schedule, Chuck visited campus at least once a month to check on Tyrell's progress. Just finished the final adjustments, Tyrell replied, gesturing to the blue and white device. Want to see it work? Chuck entered the workshop, examining the sleek design. Looks more professional than the last version. Tyrell beamed with pride. Professor Wilson helped me with the casing design. Makes it easier to transport and install. He pulled a bottle of murky water from under the table. This is from the creek behind campus, watch. He poured the dirty water into the top chamber and turned a simple crank on the side. Within seconds, clear water began flowing into the collection basin below. Chuck whistled, impressed. No electricity needed? Nope. Just manual power. 10 minutes of cranking provides enough clean water for a family's daily needs. Tyrell handed him a glass of the filtered water. Completely safe to drink. Chuck took a sip and nodded approvingly. The foundation board is meeting next week. They're excited about launching the pilot program. The mention of the pilot program sent a flutter of excitement through Tyrell's stomach. Chuck's foundation had agreed to fund the installation of 50 filtration units in 3 countries facing water crises. Tyrell would be traveling with the team to help train local communities on installation and maintenance. I still can't believe this is happening, Tyrell said quietly. Sometimes I wake up thinking I dreamed the whole thing. Chuck smiled. That's how it feels when your life changes direction, like someone flipped a switch. They walked out of the workshop into the late afternoon sunshine, heading toward the campus center where a special event was scheduled to begin in an hour. Have you seen the video lately? Chuck asked as they walked. Tyrell shook his head. Not for months. Mom watches it sometimes, though. The video, of course, was the footage from the bus that day. Someone had uploaded it to social media where it quickly went viral. Teen stands his ground, then Chuck Norris appears had millions of views. News stations picked up the story, focusing on how a moment of injustice had transformed into an unexpected partnership. The man who hit you, Chuck said carefully. He reached out to my office last week. Tyrell stopped walking. What did he want? To apologize properly this time. He's completed anger management classes as part of his community service. Says that day changed his life too. Made him face some ugly truths about himself. Tyrell was quiet for a moment, processing this information. The man's face still appeared in his dreams occasionally, twisted with anger one moment, shocked the next as Chuck stepped on board. "Do you think people really change like that?" Tyrell asked finally. Chuck considered the question. "I believe people can change when they're forced to truly see themselves. Some need a harder push than others." They continued walking, passing, students rushing to late afternoon classes. "Would you want to meet with him?" Chuck asked. "No pressure either way." Tyrell thought about it. "Maybe someday. Not yet." Chuck nodded. "Fair enough." They reached the campus center, a modern building, with floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, a stage had been set up with rows of chairs facing it. University staff hustled about, making final adjustments to microphones and lighting. Through the windows, Tyrell could see his mother had already arrived. She was chatting with Professor Wilson, looking elegant in her best dress, the one she usually saved for church. Since Tyrell had started at the university, his mom had become something of an unofficial recruiter, encouraging other parents from their neighborhood to consider sending their children to college. "Nervous about your speech?" Chuck asked as they paused outside the entrance. Tyrell took a deep breath. "A little. Speaking to the governor and all those officials, it's a lot different than presenting to my engineering class." Today's event was the official launch of the Clean Water Initiative, a partnership between the university, Chuck's foundation, and now the state government. The governor was announcing a grant program to install Tyrell's filtration systems in underserved communities across the state. "Just speak from your heart," Chuck advised. "Tell them why clean water matters to you, to your neighborhood. The technical details are important, but it's your story that will make them care." Tyrell nodded, straightening his tie. 6 months ago, I was just trying to get to a scholarship interview. Now the governor wants to shake my hand. Life is strange." "Life is opportunity," Chuck corrected gently. "Some people get their opportunity handed to them. Others have to fight for it. The ones who fight usually do more with it." Inside, the seats were filling up quickly. Local news cameras were positioned at the back of the room. Tyrell's former science teacher was there, beaming with pride as he spoke with university officials. As Tyrell and Chuck made their way toward the front, people turned to look. Some pointed, others smiled in recognition. The viral video had made them both local celebrities of sorts. Tyrell's mom spotted them and waved excitedly. When they reached her, she hugged Tyrell tightly, then surprised Chuck with a hug as well. "My two heroes," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your son did all the hard work," Chuck insisted. "I just happened to be on the right bus at the right time." She shook her head firmly. "There's no such thing as coincidence. That was divine intervention, plain and simple." The university president approached, indicating it was time to take their places. As Tyrell moved toward the stage, Chuck pulled him aside for one final word. "Remember when I found you at that bus stop? You were hurt, angry, humiliated. Look at you now." Tyrell smiled. "From that seat on the bus to this stage, who would have thought?" "I would," Chuck said simply. "The moment you refused to move, I knew you had something special. Not everyone stands their ground when it would be easier to give in." As Tyrell took his place on stage, looking out at the gathered crowd, his mother, his mentors, reporters, government officials, fellow students, he realized that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the smallest acts of courage. His had started with staying in his seat when told to move. Now, as the university president introduced him as a young innovator whose creation will bring clean water to thousands, Tyrell understood that his true journey was just beginning. And it had all started because Chuck Norris had walked onto that bus at exactly the right moment. Some might call it luck. His mother called it divine intervention. But Tyrell preferred to think of it as proof that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, even in the smallest ways, the universe finds a way to stand up for you too.